No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're using right now. On this Thoughtful Thursday, I want to talk about a listener question that came in. A person reached out and said that they'd been with an organization for a couple of years, and in previous organizations they'd worked with, there was a really strong, good culture of being able to give and receive feedback from one person to the next, kind of at all levels. And in the role they're in now, in the organization they're with now, that really doesn't exist. And they didn't even realize how much they missed that until they were in a place where that wasn't happening all the time. And so they reached out wondering how they would go about trying to create that type of culture, to create a culture where feedback is an important part of the relationship that occurs between people at all levels of the organization. And I thought this was a fantastic question and one that we actually hadn't received before.
Yeah, no, we always appreciate any type of questions that we get from the listeners always, and I think this is a really, really good one because it's a we tend to think about workplaces and how do you get, how do you build skill? How do you get feedback? How are you being coached to get better at your job? And we always kind of talk under this understanding or belief that that's just a part of what companies do and what people want to accomplish. And we rarely ever talk about, well, what about the environments of places where it doesn't live and breathe normally, or or you have leaders that are not comfortable themselves outside of maybe the level that they work within. So like it's one thing for a C-suite to get together in a meeting and be able to talk through strategies and give opinions and push back on one another or provide that. And it's it's a different thing for when it comes to like authoritative relationships with like a boss and their employee saying, hey, here's the work that you did, here's what I think about it, this is where you need to get better. But when it comes to what I think the question at the heart of this is like the informal element of feedback, where you are going to people that either don't report to you or that report to you and they want to come talk to you about something that you could get better at. But this idea of creating comfort, I really, really think that it's a great question for that, because as we talk about new expectations of leadership, this is something that we have to discuss and talk through. And I think that we need to probably spend a little bit of time here just like what are some ideas or what are some thoughts on what you can do if that is your current environment? Right.
So I think about, there are 2 groups of people in my life. There are people with whom I have a relationship that says I don't necessarily have to ask permission to give them feedback. And then there are people who I would. And the people who fall into the first category where I don't have to ask permission is a much smaller group. Like an example would be, if it was my brother is a very close friend of mine. If he did something that warranted feedback, it might start out with, what the hell were you thinking? Right. Now, you can't really start out that way with a coworker, or maybe you can. Like maybe there are people you work alongside who you've worked with for 25 years, and they are more of like a friend or a family member than a coworker, and that's how you would do it. Either way, the relationship has to dictate how feedback starts, and if you don't have the kind of relationship that allows you to give somebody feedback without having to ask permission to do it, then you need to ask permission to do it. You need to ask to be able to say that, because it sets that other person up to say, this is the kind of conversation we're going to have. And you need to be open to having them say, I would love to hear your feedback, but not right this moment. Meaning, like, I'm not in a place to be able to do that right now. Can we set it up for a different time? And that's incredibly important, because feedback that is delivered well and delivered with positive intent and delivered in the right way, coming from a right place, still won't be effective if the person hearing it is not ready to hear it, or is not prepared to hear it, or is not in a headspace to hear it, or doesn't have the relationship with you already where they trust that you have their best interests at heart. And so a lot has to go into whether or not feedback is effective. I will say that, I'm kind of starting at the end and working backwards here a little. For a culture of feedback to work, the feedback itself has to work. Meaning if people are delivering and receiving feedback that is either not relevant, or B, not delivered correctly, or C, not received correctly, that's a recipe for disaster in terms of creating a negative culture of feedback. So it has to be feedback that is both delivered right and received right. And that interaction has to happen over and over and over and over and over again. And eventually you end up with a culture of feedback.
Yeah, this feels like you're giving me feedback right now on how I just give you feedback whenever I feel like it.
Exactly.
Usually via text message, right?
Right.
No, it's a great point. I think that considering how do you build this into a culture where maybe it's a little bit absent, I think you were kind of alluding to this, but you have to role model it first. Like as the person who wants to create some influence here, yes, if you're the new leader, if you're the person who has the main amount of authority, if you're leading a team, if you're leading a company, if you're in a space where people are going to have to follow you because that's a part of what you do, it's much easier to kind of start in that space. Many times that's not the case, though. Many times there's layers of leadership. You may be one of many people in the same role and have different teams and that type of thing. But I think the first thing you have to do is role model that by going to people and saying, hey, would it be okay? Would you have 30 minutes? I'm really working on my own development. I'm working on making sure that I'm the best leader that I can be, or I'm working on building some skill in this situation. Maybe would you have 30 minutes for me where you can sit down and really kind of walk me through like what you feel I could be doing differently or better in this space? I would love to get that from you, just so I can take some notes, I can ask you some questions, and I can continue down my own journey. Now, that way, I think a lot of people are like, well, sure, absolutely. Let me think about it, we'll sit down. Then what you do with it is absolutely critical. You cannot just say these things and then not do them. Mm-hmm. You have to do that. You have to show your own self-accountability. You have to role model for them what this is supposed to look like. And if they're very open to it and they're willing to do it, then you say like, hey, at any point in the future, if I can play this same space for you, I would love to. It'd be my honor to help you in this way. So you can always let me know. If there's anything that I can do for you, that would be great also for my own development, but but just building our professional relationship. But you absolutely must do what you say you're going to do.
I agree with that. And so when you were kind of walking through that just now, in my mind I was thinking, wow, this could go poorly depending on who you're talking to. Meaning I've led teams in the past where there are people on the team with whom I have a great relationship, and I know that if I ask them a question like that, they would at least do it sincerely. Like whether they might give me feedback I didn't want to hear, but they'd be right. Their feedback would be correct. It would be rooted in something righteous, and not, they won't be trying to like throw me under the bus. It would be good feedback for me to hear. Then there are other people where they would look at it as an opportunity to take that as a weapon and see if they could say jump so that I say how high, right? So they're going to tell me to do something because right, if you're receiving this feedback, you have to do it. Whatever it is, you have to show that you're willing to do what was said. Otherwise, no matter how well you look at them in the eye and take that feedback, unless you actually do it, you will tell them that their feedback meant nothing if you're not actually willing to make those changes. And so what I want to ask you, Lorenzo, is have you ever had an exercise like this happen where you asked somebody for feedback and you expected something either, it's kind of small or lighthearted, but what you got from them was something a little heavier, a little bit more serious, and you found yourself having to go, wait a minute, this is going to take a little bit more effort or a little bit more work in order to make this happen. I did not expect this coming from them, but I have to deliver now. And so I want to ask you that, but first I want to give up to word from one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, have you ever gotten feedback from somebody that floored you, where it was relevant feedback, it was good feedback, but you didn't expect it coming from a person with whom you were kind of having this exercise of trying to create a feedback culture with, and now you have to follow through with it?
Yeah, I've definitely had a few of those moments in my life where I even questioned myself, like maybe this wasn't a great idea. In two sides, I think where people have surprised me by the seriousness of which they took it. And that's always a good surprise. That's like, sure, that really shows me that somebody truly cares, especially when they're
or they got nothing to lose.
Right. That too. Right.
Yeah.
But I like their approach when they're like, yeah, here's basically my laundry list of things, but also here's how I think we can do it. Boom. I love that. I'll take
Sure.
that all day long, right? Sometimes it becomes just a list of things, and okay, like I need to listen to it and figure it out. The immediate time that came to my mind, though, was when somebody did a really, really good job of repurposing my words in a way that made it like I really had to explain what I meant. And they were just like, you mentioned that you have an expectation of leaders that they work for us, that they serve us, that their priority is making sure that we are getting developments and that we are inspired and that we are motivated. But the feedback is that I think we have some leaders that can't do that. So like how do you do that level of work and how long should that take? Right. And I was like,
Right.
man, that's good. You should write questions for podcasts. It clearly showed me they were not only paying attention, but they really wanted to understand how do you bring this to life. And I remember in the moment just pausing. I said, that's a fantastic question. And I said, I'm going to be honest with you because it's the only way I know how to be. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work in two different ways. As the direct leader of leaders, I'm going to have to be really clear about my expectations. I'm going to have to make sure that the leaders have what they need to show up in that space and do that level of work. But I'm going to need you and the rest of the team to do two things. Hold them accountable to make sure they're doing that work, but also give them some grace because they may have to learn some new things or figure some things out. And so this is going to be an ongoing strategy that we're going to do together as a larger team. And if we have leaders that come to you or come to me and say, I'm struggling here, I want to be better, but I need help, do you think the fair thing to do is for both of us to spend time to help them in those spaces? And the person was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. I said, cool. And then what happens if we have leaders that say either I don't want to do the work, and maybe they don't say that, but they show that to us in their behaviors, or they say one thing, in front of me and they do something completely different in front of you, then that feels like there should be some accountability there. And does that seem fair? And they're like, that seems fair. I said, cool. So like, this is not just I snap my fingers and now every one of our leaders has the skill and the passion and the competence to be great at this. It's going to take work, but we also have to provide them an opportunity to want to better themselves and show us that they're trying. So it was a great conversation. And what it did for me is it helped me to realize I have to provide even more context when I kind of make these claims or say these things, when I'm painting the big picture of how leaders show up. I have to give examples and I have to lay out how do we all show up to make sure these things are happening. So that was just one time where I was like, this is really, really good questioning.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I like how you kind of laid out the fact that oftentimes when you are giving feedback or receiving feedback, it's not something that can just be changed. It's not like, hey, the way you worded this email or the way that you said this in the group didn't come off the right way, and you can say, oh, okay, next time it'll be different, and then you do it, and then you move on from it. You could be giving feedback on something or receiving feedback on something that you literally don't have the skills to just snap your fingers and change on a dime. It might take work and might take effort in order to get to a place where you need to get there. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up again is it's so important is if you want to develop a culture of feedback, every single piece of feedback you give has to be from a standpoint of you want to help that person get better for them, not because it makes your life easier. If I'm giving somebody feedback on they should do something different, and what I'm asking them to do differently is something that is making my life more difficult, that feedback will come off as completely self-serving. If whatever they're doing is not serving them well in terms of their goals, their professional goals, their professional development, what they want to do in their career, then the feedback should be verbalized in that way. Hey, when you do this and this and this, this is the impact that it can have on the team, on your peers, on your coworkers. Leave yourself out of this. It needs to be about the person doing it so that they don't have any opportunity to think they're only giving me this feedback because they want me to do something differently so that their life can be easier. It should never come from that place right there. And it's so important to remember if you want to develop a culture of feedback. Every person's feedback needs to be from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.